recently reviewed the new Jupiter X, and I found it lacking in so many areas, I decided to make my own mock-up of a new Jupiter I call the Jupiter R concept. One key difference I have with the Roland is the design philosophy. I believe Roland's philosophy with the Jupiter X was to make an inexpensive, universalist generic MIDI controller and put it inside a Jupiter shell to attract people to it, but not to fully commit to the Jupiter 8 model, and not to commit to the Jupiter 8 aesthetic either, really, because it has those clear hard buttons from the Iris series. It has modern switchgear, but yet it has those 80s looking sliders. It's very anachronistic and confused looking. On the other hand, my philosophy with my R concept was to first accurately reproduce every single function on the Jupiter 8, and then make sure that there are buttons for other models like the SH-101 that correspond intuitively and logically to the originals. And a special edition like this R should have black keys. It has a more 80s aesthetic using some of the Jupiter 6 purple as well. Of course, I departed with the 80s when it came to the display. So let's talk first about the display. As I noted in my review, the tiny display of the Jupiter X, located way off to the left, can't be seen well unless you get right over it somehow. You contrast that with my R concept, where I've used Roland's much larger MC707 display and located it close to the user and in the center. So Roland wouldn't even have to design another display. They can simply use the MC707 display, and we'd have access to seeing the parameters of the Zen-Core synth as well. I made a video deep dive of the Zen-Core on the MC707, and that makes a lot more sense to use a large display. So looking at the original Jupiter 8, you can see that oscillator 1 and 2 have a plethora of nice options, yet you see none of this on the Jupiter X. Again, Roland didn't commit to the Jupiter. On my concept R, it exactly captures the original Jupiter 8, but then also takes into consideration the 4 oscillators of the Zen-Core, in that you can flip the switch and have 3 oscillators, and then the 4th oscillator is the original oscillator 2 of the Jupiter 8. So you can see that the Zen-Core takes a back seat to the Jupiter 8. The Jupiter 8 and the models are the priority. As an owner of the SH-101, I could see that no consideration was made for all the features, so it felt like a generic MIDI controller that was awkwardly mapped to features. But with my concept R, you have actual classic Roland Portamento control, and it works for the SH-101 and other models as well. If you're using the SH-101 model, you use position 1 for pulse, 2 for saw, 3 for sub, and then the sub's 3 octaves on the original SH-101 are obviously found on the range dial. If you want noise, you use the noise on oscillator 2. Let's look at the envelope of the SH-101. It has gate plus trig, gate or LFO. You see that the Jupiter X doesn't show these options. But when you look at my concept R, it has a 3-way switch that controls this. It commits to modeling the SH-101. When you look at the SH-101, it has a choice of envelope or gate on the VCA. Again, the Jupiter X has nothing, but my R concept has a switch for that. The Jupiter X LFO doesn't really need the buttons. The sends on my concept R are the conventional way Roland has done it, where you go to the oscillator if you want to route LFO to it, and you go to the filter if you want to route LFO to the filter. That way, it doesn't feel like a generic MIDI controller, but it feels like the old Roland keyboards. It has the soul of an old Roland product. Anyway, if you think Roland should take my advice, let me know below and I'll make sure they hear about it. Either way, let me know what you think.